I'm going to talk tonight about the best way to optimize your organization, and I thought a good way to start would be to share a technique. So let's do that. Actually, the reason I'm showing this is because, crazily enough, it's back in the news. And the thing about this is it causes people to do crazy things. Now, the first atomic bomb that was dropped as a weapon was on August 6, 1945, at Hiroshima. And ever since then, things have been a little nutty. And in particular, they've been a little nutty in the state of Hawaii. Now, the state of Hawaii takes this seriously because a few years before, on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed. And so they take this thing sort of seriously. And so they decided on November 11th of 2017, when this nuclear bomb stuff started being in the news again, that they were going to take it seriously again. And they put into play an emergency preparedness plan. Now, to understand how emergency preparedness plans work, we actually have to go back a long way to
We interrupt
this.
our program at the request of the White House. This is the emergency broadcast system. All normal broadcasting has been discontinued during this emergency. This is station WGN Television. This station will continue to broadcast, furnishing news, official information, and instruction as soon as possible for the northeast section of Illinois. If you are not in the northeast section of Illinois, tune to a station furnishing information for your area.
Now, how many of you remember that message? There's some version of it showing up on TV about once a month. So that's the old version of this message, which people got at 8:09 a.m. Hawaii time on January 13th. The old message is from the Electronic Broadcasting Network. The Electronic Broadcasting Network was actually a volunteer network of television stations that would put forward this message, and they would broadcast it. Part of what they were broadcasting was a two-tone message. This was a two-frequency simultaneous tone that would be broadcast, and that would actually turn on other emergency broadcast system devices all throughout. So basically, there were these boxes whose job it was to receive the two tones, and then start recording an audio message, which was the next thing to happen, so that that station could replay that audio message, and that audio message theoretically would probably be a message from the President of the United States. And the idea was to propagate messages all the way through. Now, in the 1980s, that network was replaced with a system known as EAS, the Emergency Action System, Emergency Alert System. The Emergency Alert System was a digital version of the Electronic Broadcast Network, which is a completely analog audio version. And EAS was extended to be used, because it was digital, under the control of states, cities, and counties. So they could, too, have their own emergency networks. And those emergency networks would not necessarily just be for announcements from the White House, but could also be for announcements from those localities, so that weather incidents road closures, major accidents, industrial accidents, chemical spills, could also be broadcast through this system. The EAS system still exists today, and in fact, part of a larger system known as the integrated something at P, whatever P is, alert warning system. And IPAWS is what it's called technically. And IPAWS is the new system. And it was extended in a law that was signed into place, or executive order signed into place in 2006 by President Bush, to include something known as WEA, or the Wireless Emergency Alert System, which is this. These alerts are part of WEA. They come through the phone. They are through a sub-channel, much like SMS, but they are not the same channel as SMS, so that they actually have clear access. Because the thinking is, during an emergency, the SMS channels are going to be completely clogged. So the idea is that this comes through. It's a 90-character field, and it comes through the same undercarrier of the phone system as everything else. And so if you've ever received one of these, in Massachusetts we don't have them very often. California loves them. They set them off on a frequent basis. They start with a klaxon. Your phone will go bah, 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 and then you will wake up and get to find out that yes, it is snowing. Or in the case of people who woke up at 8:09 a.m. Saturday morning, that there was an incoming missile from destinations unknown, or sources unknown, which turned out 38 minutes later to not be true. And that was my week. My week started with that, and I've been working on this all week long. And the reason that this is there is because shortly after that, a local Hawaii news source got a picture of this screenshot and said, this screenshot is the screenshot that caused this event. Now, this is sort of true. They got that partially right. What happened was that a worker who started their shift at 8 a.m. in the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, in a division of the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency called the State Warning Point, which is basically their EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. The State Warning Point employee clicked on this link, the one that says, PACCOM CDW State Only. What they were supposed to have clicked on was this link, the one that says, Drill PACCOM CDW State Only.
Oh, nice.
It turns out that these are file names. And the data in this file is identical to the data in that file except for one bit. And that one bit says whether it's a test message or not. Now, the reason that they clicked on that was because they click on it every time they start their shift. Every time they start their shift, they click on that button. They are then presented with a screen. The screen asks them for a password, an authentication password, which changes every day. They type in the password. They then type a button that says send. They then get a confirmation that says, do you really want to send? And they say yes. And they do that at the start of every shift. And that's because it's a drill. And in a drill, you want to do exactly what you're going to do in the real emergency, except pick the right file. Now, there's a bunch of misinformation floating around. For one thing, the governor said the reason was someone pressed the wrong button, and as you can see, there are no buttons. The buttons that they pressed actually were absolutely the correct buttons. They were just with the wrong data file. The other thing thing that's going on is that the governor's office claimed, well, this isn't the menu, or this isn't it, this is it. Well, it turns out this is the same thing. As I explained to one reporter, it is the first version is basically what you see when you when you say, show me all my files, and the second version is what you see when you say, I want to open a new file. There are often different dialog boxes, and in this case, this was no different. This is the dialog box. As you can see, they clicked that one, drill PACOM demo state only, when they meant to click this one, or they clicked on this one. The one that says PACOM CDW state only, when they meant to click this one, it says drill PACOM demo state only. And that was the only difference to that. Now, we're pretty sure that the system that Hawaii is using, or at least the state warning point is using, is a system by a vendor called AlertSense. And we know this because back in 2012, they made a video of their previous version, which was using this thing called My State USA, which is the predecessor to AlertSense. And you can actually see the actual screen that they look at. These are the templates that that they choose from, which are the files that contain the data. And the templates are filled with text. You can, based on different things, they have this rich text editor. You can put in weather maps, you can put in other types of information for certain types of things for the EAS system. And this interface this is the 2012 version, it has been updated to support both EAS and WEA, the wireless system. So the EAS system also goes to television stations, it goes to radio, it goes to state emergency websites now, and it goes to all those new highway signs that they have put on all the major highways around here. So if you ever wonder how they change those messages, they use the EAS system exactly the same way that Hawaii sends out those notifications, using the exact same software. And so all of those things happen, and then there's this lovely little button here. It says send test only, send test live. And this is where you put in your authorization code. And in the new version of AlertSense, they have something very similar to this. And it's clear that the user didn't notice that the live version was chosen and not the test version. In fact, it has been reported that the operator who was coming on shift at that time did not know that they had sent the message out until moments later when their personal phone buzzed with the klaxon, as did everybody else's in the alert center, and nobody understood what had just happened. And then they had to find the governor in order to send out the false alarm message, and that took them 38 minutes. So, as you can see, these things are basically the same. One is sorted by date. We know this because this is the false alarm message that had been added afterwards. And then the other one is sorted in alphabetical order. Common ways that you sort files. So the problem here isn't anything more than the common problem that we have all the time of file name conventions. Someone chose to take the drill version of the file and name it with the word drill in front of it, keeping the rest of the file name intact for the most part. And that, this is actually, it looks like it's a retyped version because I think this is actually the file name. So there is no demo in that phrase. So someone added the word demo there. But the phenomena is exactly the same. And people are saying, well, this is the screenshot, but this isn't the screenshot. This is just the open file dialog. This is just a part of a much bigger system. In fact, the system these days looks like this. And there's a lot of noise going around about how, well, this is evidence that we need to have designers in every project. But if you look at the actual software from the vendor, they have designers. And their designers aren't bad. This is a nicely designed display. it meets a lot of current standards for good enterprise application screen design. So in fact, this is not a problem of not having designers. It's a problem of letting users name files. The thing to know about this is that there's a lot more context to this. So this happened on January 13th, this message going out. But the message wasn't actually created on January 13th. The message was created long before that, when the state of Hawaii published their new emergency preparedness plan. It's a 40-page document that came out on November 11th, 2017. And what's interesting is that more than half of that 40-page document deals with the threat of a nuclear strike from North Korea. Now, they haven't thought about this since the 1980s. Suddenly, they are thinking about this, and that's absolutely their responsibility to do. That's what you want your government to do. So they are doing absolutely all the right things. And one of the things that they talk about in this document is exactly how the message works. So the idea is that US PACOM, which is the US Pacific Command, the Joint Operations Command for the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force in Hawaii, notifies State Warning Point that they have detected a missile launch. They have 5 minutes to get that done, at which point the warnings start to go out, sirens start blaring, EASWEA is activated, and the Emergency Operations Center is put into emergency conditions. And that's because they estimate that it'll take 20 minutes before impact. The report goes on to talk about how there are multiple types of missiles. One could be just a missile that has no explosive in it. It's just a ballistic device. The next is one that has a conventional weapon, and the third one would be the worst scenario, that with a nuclear weapon. So they are thinking about all of these things. And in this document that they published on November 11th, they put in a message that they want the warning to be. And if you look real close, the text of that message matches the text of the actual message that went out, except that this one, unbeknownst to EMA, doesn't fit in the 90-character limit. So they had to truncate it. But this file, I believe, was created back in late November. And so in late November, they created the first drill file to test the system, and then they created the actual message that would go out. And the way these templates work, these templates go back to the original emergency broadcast system, which the way that television and radio stations, the access points to those stations first heard about the emergency was through a telex system. These were teletype devices that used common phone lines. How they were going to work after a nuclear explosion with an EMP, I have no clue. But somehow or other, when a nuclear bomb goes off, the first thing it does is it sends off a wave of electromagnetic particles which take out all electronics. So that system wasn't going to survive. But we had it anyways. And this was the system that taught everybody who grew up in the 1960s that they were supposed to get under their desk and pray, which was basically the method we used at that point for dealing with nuclear strikes. And those telexes, the way they worked was that the messages that the president was likely to want to communicate were punched onto yellow paper tape, this tape with holes in it. And that was fed into a teletype machine and broadcast from one to the next. And those were called templates. And templates is the anachronistic name that the entire emergency preparedness system uses for stored messages for future use. And if you look real close in this screenshot that was captured, you will see the very end of the word templates. That's what this is. This is a list of templates. It's not a menu. It's not a user interface. It's a list of files. And those files are done in advance. And that's how emergency preparedness works, is that we use all of these files to prepare for future things. For things like Amber Alerts, they just create a system and then they type in the name of the person and the license plate that they're looking for. The Amber Alert system, for those of you who don't know, is a child abduction emergency messaging system. If a child's been abducted, your phone will blur, and you'll have a name and a license plate and a car description to look for. They'll use it for weather alerts, and we can see that between the time the drill was created in the system and the original one was created, they also thought, you know what, we don't have a template for tsunamis, let's create one of those too. And so they went off and did that. As far as I know, that's not been used. So the idea is that they create these templates, and then when they have more information, they fill them in with more detail. And so that's basically how this happened. Person chose the wrong file. Now, just out of curiosity, has anyone here ever accidentally opened an old file, done something to it, and saved it over a newer file, not realizing that that's what they'd done? Right. That's all the problem was. Now, of course, there are ways to design this differently. But to do that is not easy. Because if this was an easy problem to fix, we would have fixed it decades ago. We've all been screwed by this problem. We're actually incredibly lucky this happened this last Saturday. Because, first, I'm excited every time the news is talking about something other than a tweet from the president. And I'm even more excited when they're talking about design. Because now we have a chance to, in the mainstream, talk about the importance of design. But the problem that we have is that there are multiple parties involved in this. We have three parties that we have to worry about here. We have the EOC, which is, in this case, State Warning Point, the Emergency Operations Center. We have to worry about the folks at Hawaii's Emergency Management Agency, because they're the ones who actually bought this software. And we have to think about the people at, oops, that's not what I the vendor, which we believe is a company called AlertSense. But turns out there's 23 vendors of alert origination software that is approved by FEMA. Oh, and that's the other group we have to worry about, which is FEMA, who actually sets the standards for this system. So if we were going to apply more design expertise to this, where would we start to apply it? Does it need to be in the government offices, at the EOC, or at the Emergency Management Agency? Or is it the vendor's complete responsibility? Or should FEMA be talking about where this should be done? And this should be done through rules and regulations. Do we want the government setting new standards for file name management? Because that's basically what we're talking about here. And if you think that's a weird question, remember, the original name template came from the government when they created the original paper tape system. So they already did set a standard. The question is, do we want them to set this standard? And this is the crux of the problem we have. This is, in its biggest form, the crux. Now, what's beautiful about this thing that happened last Saturday is that it is the best possible outcome. Because the worst possible outcome would be to have happen the day that the missile gets launched, for the person in the operations center to accidentally click on drill when they wanted non-drill. Remember, they didn't know they had made a mistake until their phone buzzed. But their phone buzzed. In the scenario where the missile is actually detected as launch, the emergency center hears about it, they press the wrong thing, and no message gets out. And of course, they have a checklist with about 40 things. If you get a chance to see the the office of State Warning Point, it is about the size of this area here. It has 7 desks in it, 6 people at any time. And they have a lot to do once that missile gets launched. They have notebooks filled with procedures of what they're supposed to be following. The last thing they're going to do is pay attention to whether their phone actually sent that message out or not. So how long before they notice that the message didn't go out? When impact is 20 minutes after launch. And they don't even find out until the 5-minute mark. So that's the bigger problem. And how do we solve that problem with a distributed design approach? This turns out to be the really big, interesting question. So I planned this talk long before the North Koreans decided not to attack us last Saturday. But it turns out that what we're talking about here is how do we get every person who has an influence on the design to know enough about design to be able to do the right thing. When someone saves a file that is going to be used by other people, unwittingly, they are designing. They are creating, in essence, a menu item for a later date. A menu item that will exist in a context with other files, some of which have been created already, and some of which will come in the future. So how do we teach people to save files properly? Now, there are technical solutions that we could apply this. For instance, why are templates named at all? That's a historical anachronism back to when paper tapes all looked identical, and you could not look at a physical paper tape and tell what message was stored in it. So they named every paper tape with a handwritten label on the tape. And we've just kept that habit of naming templates. But now, we can see the message inside because it's only 90 characters. We can show it. The way to think about this is, imagine you have 4 cardboard boxes. They're all identical cardboard boxes, and you can't see the insides. If one of them is a mouse, one of them is a gerbil, one of them is a hamster, and one of them is a meerkat, you're not going to know which is in which box. If you replace those with clear plastic boxes, so you can actually see the contents, you no longer need the label. Unless, of course, you can't tell the difference between a gerbil and a hamster, or a mouse and a meerkat. The latter, I think, is probably easier than the former. You don't need to have the labels anymore. We don't need to have the templates labeled. They are only 90 character messages. We could just display the actual messages. Then you'd know what they were. The other thing is, if you're going to have separate drill templates from non-drill templates, you could color code them. It's a bit. The software could show them. You'd probably want some other form of identification beyond color, because there are people who can't distinguish colors. But you could do something with iconography or font or shape, something, or some clever labeling like drill, test only, something like that. So the technical part of this is not the hard part. This is not the hard thing. The hard thing is, how do we take an organization that has 4 distributed teams and get them to work together? This is not 4 organizations. This is one organization for which the paychecks come from 4 separate places. And that's a really important distinction, because we have to start thinking of our teams as being unified, independent of the titles that we have and the generation sources of our paychecks. Because, in fact, this is just like corporate America, where we have a marketing team over here and a product team over there and a research team over there, and we have decided to isolate all of them and silo them. It is now the same thing. Government actually mirrors its society. And they have just created a structure that's just like ours. So this is the essence of what we need to have happen, is to start saying, okay, the only way this is going to succeed is if we have design expertise everywhere. Now, I'm not talking about having the world's best designers everywhere. We don't need the world's best designers to get file names correct. But we need some thoughtfulness of implication. And if you want to think that, okay, well, these are just state employees and they don't know much about designing things, then you don't know much about state employees, and in particular, you don't know much about state employees in the world of emergency preparedness, because they design everything. Emergency preparedness is about designing the future. They have notebooks and files and templates and documents for every possible future scenario they can come up with. And I guarantee you, every single emergency preparedness office in this country is now thinking about file names. Or at least they will be shortly, as soon as they figure out that that's what the problem was. I heard today from the person in charge of New Orleans' emergency preparedness system. They're not using AlertSense, they're using a system called Everbright. I don't know who names emergency systems, but okay, they're using Everbright. What? Yeah, they're all glowing, yes. She said, yeah, we are now re-looking at our procedures, because we definitely don't want to be on the headlines of the Wall Street Journal with this problem. But more importantly, they want to make sure they don't have this issue. Right? So, we have to start to think about, how do we get design into all these places? Just like we have to think about, how do we get design into all the places in our organization? Now, I know you were told to turn off your phones, but if you don't have a piece of paper and a pen, I'm going to ask you to turn them on again, because I want you to open up someplace where you can write something down. You're not going to show it to anybody. It's a temporary thing. And I'm okay with you keeping your phone on for the rest of the day. So that's okay with me too. And here's what I want you to write down. I want you to think about your week. I know what my week was like. I want you to think about your week, the last 5 or so working days you had. And I want you to write down somewhere between 3 and 8 things you feel good about, things you accomplished over the last week for your work. Tasks you got done, other things that might have gone well, some things that if I were to say to you, what happened this week that went well for you? Write down 3 to 5 things that went well over the last week. I'll give you a minute to do this. Here's what I want you to do. Next to each item that you listed, I want you to write a number between 0 and 100. And that number represents the amount of that task that something you learned in school helped. Right? So you would choose a 0 if nothing that you learned in school was helpful in getting that task done. And you'd write 100 if the entire task was based on stuff you learned in school and nothing else. Okay? So everything about it was stuff you learned in school, not a thing afterward. So write that next to each line. 0 meant nothing in school prepared you for this. 100 means you are 100% prepared by school for this task.
This will include kindergarten.
You can include kindergarten if you want. So if your task involves sharing, and playing well with others, and that would go. Okay, and when you have that done, I'd like you to stand up. Now, I would like you to, if you don't have any item with a number higher than a 20, I want you to sit down. Okay, 30, 40, 50. And notice that most of the audience has sat down at this point. There's still a bunch of people out. 60, 70, 80, 90, 100.
Some people are still in school.
Some people are still in school. Well, there's that. Excellent. Eric, just out of curiosity, what was your second highest number?
My second highest number was 95.
Okay. So what's the thing that you, what's the 100?
100 was actually answering student questions.
There you go. Okay. Julie?
Mine was actually completed this Sunday. My team and I, from a group project, we developed a companion app for CNN. It was supposed to really engage their current user base in a more political, local environment.
And everything was something you learned in school?
Not directly with him. I'm a prior design student elsewhere.
Okay.
So.
Excellent. Just one more. Sir?
I wrote emails to faculty at my school, and I mean, I learned how to write in school. So.
Okay. There you go. Nice. Okay, everybody can sit down. For most of us, much of what we do every week, we didn't learn in school. So if we didn't learn it in school, where did we learn it?
On the job.
On the job, for the most part, right? Life is certainly a place we learn things, but on the job. And so, how much of the construction of our working environment is actually constructed to help us learn? Have we designed our workplace to learn? Now, one of the interesting things about emergency preparedness is that their job is in fact constructed to learn. One of the things that emergency preparedness people do frequently is they run drills. In fact, the reason that that drill was being run on Saturday was to make sure that the authentication password that the person who was going to send that message, they knew what it was. If they were going to get it wrong because they couldn't remember the password, you want them to get it wrong at the shift change, not at the moment after launch detection. So they run that drill every Saturday. They run that drill every Sunday, every Monday. In fact, they run it 3 times a day because there are 3 shifts in each day. And every day that drill is run. They just picked the wrong file. So, the thing that happens when you run a drill is you see the faults, you see the stress points, you see what happens when things don't work out as you intended. And if we remember our definition of design, design is in fact the rendering of intent. A designer has in their head an intention they want in the world, and they then go about rendering it. In emergency preparedness, you do exactly the same thing. You have an intent, which is to make sure that people are as safe as possible at any possible moment. And you look for all the places where that rendering is going to go awry. People in emergency preparedness do amazing things. The CDC, on a regular basis, runs pandemic drills. The last one they ran was in the city of Atlanta, where they hired hundreds of people to pretend they were zombies. They ran what's called a zombie drill. And they literally let them dress up and do makeup, and they get to do the whole Walking Dead thing. And as zombies, they, all of the first responders go and practice how to keep a pandemic under control. When a zombie touches another person, they become a zombie. That's the spread of the disease. So they have to isolate the disease and treat it. They have to figure out how to treat the individuals. And so they do all the things they would do in any, massive, fast-spreading pandemic attack, such as an Ebola incident, except they faked it all. And the nice thing was everybody had fun playing a zombie, and the first responders had fun, but they were actually able to track and see where there were massive holes in their process, where the disease spread, where they didn't expect it to spread. All sorts of elements of the process was able to be detected. And if that's not a design exercise, I don't know what is. That is, in fact, the rendering of intent. So the problem isn't that the folks at Hawaii Emergency Management Agency and the folks in the state warning point are not designers. They actually are designers. They're just not trained to spot things like bad file names. And apparently we're not either, because if we were, we would have fixed this problem a long time ago. So, how do we get people the actual skills that they need? there's this notion in design education of this thing called the T-shaped person. And the T-shaped person is an individual who is strong in one thing, let's say information architecture, and broad in other things. And the theory behind the T-shaped person is you want to hire a whole bunch of T-shaped people. You want to get someone who's an information architect, you want to get someone who's a visual designer, you want to get someone who's a user researcher. And we often equate roles to the strong skill. We call someone who is strong in information architecture an information architect. We call someone who's strong in user research a user researcher. And our goal is to produce these teams that have these different skills, and we have lots of T-shaped people. But what we've been learning over the years is that this is actually a horrible, inefficient way to staff a team. And what makes it worse is that there are no T-shaped people. What we need are full-bodied people who actually match a model that looks less like a T and more like a broken comb. Though I was told the other day that if I do it this way, I turn it into a jellyfish. And the idea behind the broken comb people is that these are all the different skills, and that people have a variety of different skills at different lengths. The length of the tine of the comb represents the amount of knowledge and skill and experience that they have with that time. And what we can then do is create education programs to be able to lengthen their times by teaching them new experiences and new skills. And we can design our workplaces to do just that. We can design our workplaces to fill in those gaps. And if we have people who have different patterns of their broken comb, some will have long time, some will have short, we can figure out what our resources are. But to do this, we have to separate out roles from skills. We have to be thinking about skills separate from roles. Because I don't know what the role of this person is, but I can tell you what the skills of that person are. Roles are not important. We don't need information architects, we don't need user researchers, we don't need visual designers. What we need are people who have knowledge in information architecture, people who have knowledge in user research, people who have knowledge and skills in visual design. And the more people we have on our team who can handle those things, the better the outcomes we will get. If everybody on our team can do a decent job at user research, then no matter who's available, we can give them the pop-up user research task that just happened, and they can go off and do a decent job at it. So by making sure that we have those skills, it turns out we do a fabulous job of keeping the team productive and helping us. And we can do this with really some clever tricks. So one thing that we're seeing teams do is breaking an old rule. The old rule is that, let's say you have a really important project for which the information architecture is going to be hypercritical. It has to be right. So the old rule is you find the person with the longest information architecture time, the most skill, and you give them that job. You're our best information architecture person, you do that work. That's the old way of doing it. The new way of doing it is you find one or two people whose information architecture skills are not as great, and you take your person who's got the longest one and you say, I want you to mentor them. We're going to give them the project. You are not to do the work. They are to do the work. You are to oversee the work. You are to teach them everything they need to know to do as good a job as you would do. Now, initially, this will take a little longer because you now have two people working on something and one of them is not as good as the other. But frankly, if you've hired well, you will get those people up to speed quickly. And every time they learn something, they get better at it. And then next time it rolls around, you have 2 people or 3 people who are equally as good at being information architects. And they can train others. And suddenly, the whole team becomes good at this. Now the thing is that we tend to think of teams as the people who are doing the design work, the people who work on the design team, who have designer in their name, who are paid by the design part of the organization, who were hired by the design part of the organization. We think of them as the designers. But they aren't the only designers on the team. Because we've got product managers who are making decisions about what the product should have in it and what it shouldn't. We've got developers who are building screens and creating things, and they don't always have a designer sitting next to them, so they're making design decisions. Sometimes they're good ones, sometimes they're not. And so the design team is anyone who influences the outcome of the product. Now, this idea has gotten me in a lot of trouble. I tweeted this once, and hundreds of people said, oh, does that mean if I, tell someone to take aspirin, I'm suddenly a doctor? Does that mean that if I write down, draw out an idea for what my house should be like, I'm suddenly an architect? And the answer to both of those questions is absolutely not, because doctors and architects are licensed professions. You can only be a doctor or an architect if the state says you're a doctor or an architect. But anyone can be a designer. Nobody made us designers, we just decided to put that on our business card. And when someone said, stand up if you're looking for a design job, we stood up. And proudly said, we're designers. And nobody questioned that. So we shouldn't question anybody else being a designer either. The only difference between them and us is that we happen to have practiced more. We have run more drills. We have done the homework. And they haven't done that yet. But if we can get the influencers to actually understand, and we can get their skills to amp up, just like we get the other designers on our teams to amp up, what would it be like if instead of giving a developer a wireframe document that has the same dialog box drawn out 15 times with every possible state change, you could just go to a whiteboard, sketch a basic idea, and the developer says, I got it, I'm going to build something for you. And they come back minutes later with a working version the way you would have done it. How cool would that be? Oh, and by the way, the question I always get when I talk about this, well, if everybody's designing, what does the designer do? You work on the really hard problems, like file names. Problems we have left aside for decades because we are drawing 15 versions of the same damn dialog box over and over and over again. So we want to be thinking about how do we get everybody's skills up. And this is our responsibility. The core essence of design in this decade is shifting from making stuff to teaching everyone to make the stuff. Design leadership is no longer about hiring a team full of Johnny Ives who will go off and create amazing things. Because as Apple has proven in the last year, even Johnny Ives stopped making amazing things. Actually, they proved it when iTunes first came out, but we won't talk about that. Johnny was never good at the software thing. That's why we got flat design. But that's no longer our responsibility. Design leaders are about setting a vision for the organization that helps us understand where the design needs to go, and then making sure that everyone can help us get closer to that vision. And that's no different than what happens in emergency preparedness. In emergency preparedness, they have a vision of getting through an uncontrollable event in as controlled a way as possible, and having everybody prepared to do this. One of the things that we learned in Hawaii on Saturday was that people, when they find out that a missile is coming their way, do stupid things. Like they all try to get on the highway and go home at the same time. And that's the wrong thing for them to do. So now, the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency has a lot more information on what they have to do to make the citizenship prepared for, hopefully, an event that will never happen. And they will do that through careful design. So how are we creating the environments to learn in our organizations? It turns out we're already doing that. The tools that we use in design today can help us teach design. We just have to think of them as teaching tools and not making tools. Take the very popular design sprint. The design sprint is a 5-day activity where you gather a team and they work through a series of exercises trying to make a version of the product. But they don't just make it. They try out the ideas with each other. They explore what the actual problem is. They bring in real users. They test prototypes with those users. And in each of those things, the team is learning how to design. They're not just learning the basics of design, like how to sketch an idea on a piece of paper or how to run a simple usability test. They're learning things about who is the user, which is at the core of design. What is the user trying to accomplish? What would be success for this user? What assumptions do we have in the organization that are wrong? Hawaii Emergency Management assumed that people would not get on the highways when given this message. They were wrong. So what do they do differently next time? And that's the essence of design, is understanding all of those things. If we clearly communicated who our users were and what they were trying to accomplish to the organization so that everybody in the organization was on the same page about this, think of how much easier our job would be. Because so much of modern day design politics inside organizations is two people not knowing the same things about who the users are and what they're trying to accomplish, if they know anything at all. So that's the key, is understanding all those things. The struggle we have is not about trying to get our organizations to ship great products. The struggle that we have is trying to get our organizations to stop shipping bad products. That's the charter that we have. Design sprints, its sister, the design studio. Its sister, the design critique. These are all established practices that are all about helping people understand design and how to do it better. User research is about who the user is. Customer journey maps are about the journey of the customer. All of these things are basic, simple design techniques. What doesn't work? Brown bag lunches. Having a brown bag lunch and getting up in front of the room and telling people what makes a good design never works. The way we learned design was to roll up our sleeves and start designing things. The way we're going to get everybody else to learn design is to help them roll up their sleeves and start designing things. Get those things in front of users. Have them find out what works and what doesn't work. Learn from it. Run the drills. That's the process. Now, the reason that I got interested in this was because, as Peter mentioned, we have an organization, we have a part of our organization called Center, which is a school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to create new UX designers. And the first question that I asked was, well, if 75% of what every designer does, they learn outside of school, what do we teach in school? Why do we bother? And it turns out it's really important to teach in school, because the best thing we can teach is how to learn, how to run the drills. And so in Center, we use the same techniques that they use in emergency preparedness. We run the drills. The students are always practicing. They spend 66% of their time doing real-world project work, where the number one priority is learning. We teach the students how to design by constantly learning. Our first cohort is now 15 months in, and on their way to, is that right? No, 14 months in. They're 14 months in. They're on their way. They're going to graduate in October. It's a 2-year program. And this week, because of the weather, one of the things they're learning is how to keep a project going when you have 2 snow days in a row. That was after a Monday holiday. So you already have a shortened sprint, and now it's 2 days shorter. How do you keep it moving forward? How do you reschedule stakeholder interviews with important stakeholders? Now, you don't think of these as typical design skills, but keeping people off the highway, the emergency preparedness people usually don't think of as a major safety thing. But it's the little details that get you. And being able to reschedule a stakeholder interview so that you can make sure the project keeps moving, that's a key skill. And so we're not only teaching visual design and information architecture and all the things, but we're teaching those interpersonal skills, those communication skills, those organizational skills that have to be there. And the way we teach those is not through classes, but through training and running the drills. And so where in our environments, where in our work, can we be creating a culture of continuous learning? Can we be creating the practices of running the drills? What does that look like? And that's really what I think our charter is for the next few years, is to figure that out, to understand what that means. Because if we can do that, we can get our organizations to be much better at meeting the demands of design that are going to be in the nooks and crannies. Because we've got the basic thing down. We know how to create decent screens. We know how to create decent workflows. We definitely know how to program for the happy case. The happy scenario, where everything goes perfectly well. What we haven't done the big homework on is for the faults and the stress points. And that moment when someone clicks the wrong file name, thinking they clicked the right one. How do we catch that? How do we have a design process that understands how to get there? That is the big challenge in design. It's not virtual reality. It's not going to be dealing with the Internet of Things, which, by the way, is just other people's computers in your house. It is going to be designing a team that exists across organizational silos, possibly across organization boundaries, that works together to create solutions that actually work not only in the happy, everything goes smoothly case, but in those moments where things don't go as planned. That's where we are going to need the most help. The most important skill that we can have as designers is to be constantly learning how to design. And that's what I came to talk to you about. Now, if by chance you found this to be the least bit interesting, you can, I'm going to be writing more about this at uie.com. If you work in design and we're not connected on LinkedIn, please by all means connect with me on LinkedIn. And you can feel free, if you're so inclined, to follow me on the Twitters, where I tweet about design strategy, design education, and the amazing customer service habits of the airline industry. Talk about studying failure points. I mentioned Center. We are currently looking for internships for our students. So if you're a company that does paid internships, we will only take paid internships for our students. If you're a company that does paid internships and you want to get some well-rounded designers to have over the summer months, the students are very excited about this. We are also, the students, our next cohort, we have all the students, applicants we need for 2 more cohorts. What we're missing is we are missing funding. Our students get their funding from donations. The donations they take out as a loan voluntarily, with the intent that when they pay it back, they are making donations for the next student. So it just, any donations go in actually pay for multiple students. And my personal goal is to make our students so awesome that companies get in a bidding war. Right now, we have more companies interested in hiring our students than we have students in the program. So we are very excited about our companies getting in a bidding war, and we want the bidding war to include paying their student loan every month, which isn't that much money to begin with. So that way, my goal is that our students never make a payment because the companies assume it and pay for the education. So they don't make any payments while they're in school or 3 months afterwards, and then once they've got a job, they can start making payments, but we'll let the companies do that on their behalf. And the students won't have to worry about that. So that is our intentionally designed student loan system, and it's all donation-based. So if you can help us by making a donation, that would be fantastic. A couple other things I wanted to mention is that coming up in Newport Beach in March, we have a conference called the UX Immersion Conference Interactions, and at that conference is a full-day workshop on how to do journey maps and experience maps by Jim Callback, and how to do critique and design studio. So if those techniques are something you want to learn, I would highly recommend you come. There are also sessions on analytics for measuring the success of design, and amazing new layout stuff you can do with CSS Grid, how to design for micro interactions by Dan Saffer, who wrote the book on the same title. He's only teaching that once this year, and it's at this conference. And Stephen Anderson talking about taking complexity and visualizing that information in a simple way. And then the other thing, and if you use this code, Jared200, you'll get $200 off the price. And that's at uxi.uie.com. And then the other thing I want to tell you is, for people who are in leadership positions, we have a strategy workshop where you create a playbook of out of 130 plays, and that's happening in Chattanooga at Center's facilities, February 22nd, 23rd. We start with 130 plays. You whittle it down to 6 or 8 of plays that match your organization, and again, if you use a coupon code, you'll get a discount. So that's what I came to talk to you about. Thank you very much for encouraging my behavior.
So we only have time for 2 or 3 questions, so I'll let Jared pick people and I'll get microphones to you.
Before we even do that, we're very thankful that we had Jared here as a speaker. And one of my tasks today, delegated by BostonCHI, was to present Jared with a thank you gift.
Oh,
And
well,
I
thank you.
personally went to select it. I met with the grape grower who made this, and he's autographed the bottle to you and David.
That's lovely. Because it's autographed, does that mean I'm not allowed to drink it?
Of course you can drink it, you just have to appreciate the fact that it was dedicated to you.
Okay. Well, I am very appreciative of dedicated to, this is really cool. It says to Dana and Jared. And it's signed by something I can't read.
Blaze Pentel.
Blaze Pentel, which is, so he signed it in Sharpie here, but then it's signed on the label, I guess, in pen. So the guy likes to sign his name.
Yeah, well, he's actually originally from North Carolina. He was a political commentator in the United States. He married an English woman and moved to Burgundy and learned how to grow wines.
Okay. And he now lives in Framingham.
No, he doesn't live in Framingham. He lives in Bone de Shore.
Bone de Shore, but this says Vineyard Road, Framingham.
No, they're the people.
I see, okay. Thank you, that's lovely.
In order to get the wine into the U.S., they have to go through, by Massachusetts law.
I see, they have to go through Framingham.
They have to go through a licensed distributor.
Right, okay. Well, that was way more information than anyone else here needed to know, but I'm thankful. Thank you, Peter, that's lovely.
And now you can give Jared his questions.
All right, we're down to 2 questions. But after that, there'll be dessert outside, and Jared will still be here, and you can still ask Jared questions.
Yes.
But we'll get 2
Okay,
broadcast
2 questions. Yes. So, are you picking or am I?
You
You
pick,
have
I'll give you the
microphone.
mic.
Oh, okay. Well, David has his hand up first.
Thank you. First, thank you very much for a good talk. Toward the beginning, you were talking about the different fragments of the organization and implied that because it was fragmented, there was not a coherent design, and that was the part of the problem. But it seems to me that even if you spread designers in every one of those fragments, you still have incoherence in what comes out. And so I don't think that your idea of having good designers in each group really solves it.
No, you're right. Just having designers in each group with them still being siloed is still the problem of them being siloed. So you have to move to the next step, which I wasn't as clear on, which is they all have to work with each other. And so that's the point of running joint drills. being able to actually participate, have the vendor participate, have FEMA participate, have everybody participate in what's going on. Right? I am absolutely sure at this point, I know for a fact that FEMA and the FCC have both announced that they are announcing investigations into what happened in Hawaii. I'm going to guess that the vendor, if they haven't already, will be also launching an investigation. That's already happening. So they're already starting to work together. The question is, can we actually make that happen when it doesn't show up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal? Can we make that happen all the time? And that's about rethinking the way that when we're dealing with third-party packages, which we are dealing with all the time, how this happens. And that's very true today. I mean, this is not new, and this is actually a major effort. If you look at a major enterprise vendor like Salesforce, for example, or SAP, they already have the capabilities to have organizations work directly with them so that they can understand the organization's needs and the organization can understand how to change the design. These are not new concepts. We just have to bring them into the new frame of understanding how to learn. That exists today. So that was actually quite right. Sir.
Also, thank you for...
Is that on?
I don't think so. Thank you for doing it. What would you do to that employee who made a mistake like that? Does he lose his job or...
The employee didn't make a mistake.
That's what it's
Okay? There is no such thing as a user error. Just going to go right out there and say that. That also got me in trouble on Twitter. Okay? The system did not work. We can decide where the failure point was, whether it was at the moment that the person clicked. It probably wasn't. It was probably at the moment the templates were saved. It may actually be the fact that the software asks for a name for the template. But it definitely was not an error of the user. Now, standard government protocol is what it should be, is that you take somebody and you reassign them, because until you complete the investigation, you won't know if it was a malicious act or not. You don't necessarily want them in the same position for very long. But that investigation should end quickly, and the person should not be penalized, and should be able to continue their work, and in some ways be rewarded for all of the really good things that came out of this exercise, of which there were a lot. If you think in terms of an emergency preparedness drill, if someone leaves someone accidentally in a dangerous situation because the system failed to detect, we don't penalize the person. We say, okay, the system broke. We need to fix the system. We have to treat these like drills. Every time we have an opportunity to learn, we should be learning, and we should be celebrating that learning. And that's the key piece. So that's where we're at. Enjoy dessert.
And first, let's thank Jared again.